They say technology decides the future of nations. But here's the question. If Japan, back in 1914, suddenly had access to modern technology, jets, missiles, aircraft carriers, even the internet, could they really win World War I? Or would that victory come at a cost too great to handle? Stay with me, because the answer isn't as simple as it seems. Japan in 1914, a rising power. At the start of World War I, Japan wasn't the giant empire we picture from World War II. Yes, it had modernized after defeating Russia in 1905, but compared to the industrial monsters like Britain, France, and the United States, Japan was still small. Population, smaller. Resources, severely limited, especially oil and steel. Global influence, mostly in East Asia, not worldwide. So even if Japan had modern weapons, the first conflict arises. How do you sustain victory when your economy can't feed the machine of war? Battlefield advantage. Now let's imagine Japan unleashes 21st century tech in 1914. F-35 jets against biplanes. Nuclear submarines against wooden warships. Satellites giving instant intelligence when Europe is still sending telegrams. At first, Japan would look unstoppable. The Allies, Britain, France, Russia, would be shocked. The Central Powers, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and the Ottoman Empire, might even try to ally with Japan out of fear. But here's the twist. Technology wins battles, not wars. Without fuel supplies, maintenance knowledge, and global logistics, Japan's modern machines would soon become useless. The Allied response. This is where the real conflict begins. If Japan suddenly displayed futuristic weapons, the Allies wouldn't just sit back. Britain had the largest empire on Earth. The United States was already watching closely from across the Pacific. Together, they would likely unite faster against Japan. Instead of Europe tearing itself apart in trenches, the war might shift focus to the Pacific. A showdown between Japan and the West decades earlier than expected. Would Japan's early dominance actually trigger its early downfall? The resource problem. Japan's biggest weakness in both World War I and World War II was resources. No oil fields, limited iron, depended heavily on imports. So even with modern war machines, Japan would burn through fuel faster than it could ever replace it. Imagine Japan deploying aircraft carriers in 1914. But by 1915, half of them would be useless because there's no gasoline to run them. Victory in the short term, collapse in the long term. Global consequences. Now, here's the real twist most people don't think about. If Japan had crushed Europe with advanced technology, the map of the world today would be unrecognizable. No roaring 20s in America. No Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Hitler would never rise. The Cold War might not be USA versus USSR, but USA versus Japan. But would Japan survive long enough to dominate? Or would their fragile empire break apart under the weight of its own ambition? The social impact wars are not just about weapons, they're about people. Imagine Japanese propaganda using the internet in 1914. They could spread messages globally, influence revolutions, even destabilize enemies without firing a shot. But the flip side? The world would see Japan's aggression even faster. Public opinion in the US and Europe would demand a united war against them. Technology gives power, but it also exposes you to the world's judgment. Could Japan actually win? Here's the big answer. Yes, with modern technology, Japan could crush any single army in 1914. But could they crush all of them at once? Britain, France, Russia, and eventually the United States? History suggests no. Because war isn't just about who has the strongest weapons. It's about who can keep fighting the longest. Japan's limited resources, small population, and fragile economy mean their victory would likely be short-lived. Instead of ruling the world, Japan might end up isolated, drained, and eventually destroyed by the very powers it tried to dominate. The real lesson. So, what's the takeaway? Technology can change history, but it can't erase geography, resources, and human ambition. If Japan had modern weapons in World War I, They might win the first battles, but in the end, the world would unite against them, and their victory would collapse into defeat. And that's the paradox of power. Sometimes winning too early means losing everything later. Imagine for a moment, Japan crushes the first battles with AI-driven weapons, but soon the rest of the world sees the threat. America, Britain, France, even nations once divided, all form an emergency alliance. Suddenly, Japan isn't fighting one war, it's fighting the world. And history shows, no empire survives when the entire planet turns against it. The hidden cost of victory. Even if Japan holds power for a while, the cost is enormous. Advanced tech needs endless fuel, rare minerals, and constant innovation. Sooner or later, the very empire that rose on technology would collapse under its own weight, proving that no nation can win a war forever. And that's the paradox of power. Sometimes winning too early means losing everything later. Technology can give you the future, but it can't protect you from history's most dangerous weapon, human ambition. So what do you think? Would Japan's futuristic victory have rewritten history or simply accelerated their downfall?